My name is Claire Whitman, and I'm 33 years old. I live in Boulder, Colorado, a city surrounded by mountains, filled with hikers and students and people who think fresh air can heal anything. Maybe they're right. Or maybe they've just never been kicked out of their home at 18 by the one person who was supposed to love them no matter what. 15 years ago, on a cold evening in early October, my life split in two, before and after. That was the night my father opened our front door and pointed at it, not saying a single word, just standing there with his jaw clenched and eyes that had once looked at me with warmth now filled with something else. Something I didn't understand at the time. All I knew was that my secret had made me unwelcome in my own home. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story is hitting close to home, don't forget to like and subscribe to see how one moment of rejection turned into a lifetime of resilience. Back then, we lived in a modest house near the foothills. My dad, Robert Whitman, was a mechanic, well-known, respected. The kind of man who taught Sunday school, donated old car parts to the high school auto shop, and fixed people's cars for free if he knew they were struggling. To the outside world, he was generous, loyal, a man of conviction. To me, he was just Dad. Strict, sure, but with a soft side he reserved for me, especially after Mom died. Or at least, I thought so. When I was a child, he would braid my hair before school. Not very well, but with so much concentration on his face that I never told him it looked crooked. He made pancakes every Saturday morning, humming to Johnny Cash as he flipped them on the old skillet we still had from Mom's kitchen. I used to think that grief had made him kinder. I didn't realize it had also made him more afraid. Afraid of change, of shame, of anything that might challenge the legacy of the woman he'd lost. By the time I was 16, I knew I was different. Not broken, just different. I liked girls, not boys. And for 2 years I kept that truth buried like a fossil I was afraid to uncover. I'd never even said it aloud, not even in my own mind. But hiding something that big eats away at you. And when I finally did fall in love, with a girl named Lila from my drama class, I thought maybe that kind of love could melt the ice around my father's heart. I was wrong. Lila and I were careful. We passed notes, met behind the school, kissed only once in the shadows of a school play rehearsal. But we weren't careful enough. One afternoon, my father picked me up early from school. He didn't speak the whole way home. When we got there, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket, one of the notes Lila had written me, filled with innocent things like, "I miss your laugh," and "I wish we didn't have to hide." He read it silently, then crumpled it, and looked at me like I was a stranger, not a daughter, not a child he had raised alone, just something foreign, dangerous. "What is this?" he asked. His voice didn't shake. Mine did. I tried to explain. I told him I was still me, that I wasn't ashamed, that I had hoped, naively, that he could understand. He didn't yell. He didn't call me names. He didn't even hit me, which I think made it worse. He just turned, walked to the front door, opened it, and waited. "Out," he said. I froze. "Out," he repeated. "As long as you're living in sin under my roof, you won't be living here." I remember the wind hitting my face as I stepped outside. The sound of the door closing behind me wasn't loud, but it might as well have been a cannon. It echoed in my bones for years. I spent the night on a friend's couch, then another. I dropped out of school 2 months before graduation, picked up a job as a waitress in Denver, scraped enough money to rent a room in a house shared by 3 strangers and one very temperamental cat. I didn't see or speak to my father after that. There were times when I thought about writing to him. Holidays, my birthday, the anniversary of Mom's death, but I always stopped myself. I didn't want to give him the power to hurt me again. If he wanted to find me, he knew where to look. Boulder isn't a big place, but he didn't. And so I built my own life. Slowly, painfully. I got my GED. Then I went to a community college and studied graphic design. I met people who saw me as whole, not flawed. I learned how to laugh again, without watching the door like someone might slam it in my face. I fell in love, real love, and lost it, and loved again. I made peace with some of the broken pieces. I found others I never knew I was missing. But I never stopped wondering if he ever regretted it, kicking me out, throwing me away, trading his daughter for some warped idea of righteousness. 15 years passed. And then, on a rainy Tuesday that smelled like wet asphalt and change, someone knocked on my door. I opened it and saw a man I barely recognized. Thinner, grayer, shoulders hunched like he was trying to fold into himself. It was my father, Robert Whitman, and he was crying. Not softly, not silently. His chest shook with sobs he clearly wasn't used to letting out. I just stood there, frozen in my doorway, holding a tea towel and wearing socks with holes in them. He didn't say hello. He didn't say my name. The first words out of his mouth were, "I'm sorry. I should never have let you go." And just like that, the wind from 15 years ago came rushing back into my chest. But this time, I didn't step outside. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say a word. I let him cry. Because whatever story had brought him to my doorstep, it was only just beginning. And this time, I wasn't the one who needed to explain. He stood there, my father, dripping on the welcome mat that hadn't welcomed him in over a decade. The man who once turned his back on me because of who I loved now looked like he'd been carrying the weight of that choice ever since. His cheeks were flushed, not just from the wind, but from shame, maybe. Or maybe regret. I couldn't tell. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, and I didn't know this version of him. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. Still, I stepped back, silently, and let him in. He moved slowly, as if unsure whether his legs would obey him. He didn't even glance around the room. I had imagined this moment before, but never like this. In those daydreams, I had the upper hand. I was angry, cold. I demanded apologies or gave him nothing but the same silence he gave me. But now that it was real, everything felt heavier, more complicated. He sat down on the edge of the couch like he didn't want to leave an imprint. I stood across from him, arms folded tightly, trying to steady my breath. "I saw your name in a community bulletin," he finally said, voice hoarse. "You designed a flyer for some fundraiser in town. It had your email. He paused, his eyes glistening again. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Claire." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Instead, I waited. He looked down at his hands, rough, scarred hands that once built my first bike from scratch and taught me how to fix a leaky faucet. Now they trembled. "I was wrong," he said. "God, I was so wrong. I thought I was doing what was right, what your mother would have wanted. But it wasn't about her. It was about me, my fear, my ignorance." He looked up. His eyes searched mine for a sign, a thread to hold on to. "You were just a kid," he said. "And I threw you away." A long silence stretched between us. I could feel the years piling up in that room. The birthdays missed, the holidays ignored, the milestones we never shared, my graduation, my first apartment, the time I broke my arm ice skating and went to the ER alone. All those moments came flooding back. "Why now?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to me, small but sharp. His mouth opened but no sound came. He rubbed his face, then took a shaky breath. "I got sick last year. Cancer. Stage 2. I had surgery. I'm clean now for the moment, but it shook something loose in me. I kept thinking if I died, you'd never know how sorry I was. That I never stopped loving you. That I was proud of you, even when I wouldn't let myself say it." I blinked, feeling heat rise in my chest. Not anger, not exactly. Not forgiveness either. Something in between. Confusion, maybe. Grief I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "I didn't need you to be proud of me," I said. "I needed you to be there." He nodded slowly, absorbing the blow. "I know," he whispered. He asked if we could talk. Just talk. Not about the past. At least not right away. About my life now. What I did. Who I was. I told him I worked in graphic design, freelancing for nonprofits and small businesses. That I lived alone. By choice. That I had friends who were my real family. That I had spent years in therapy, unlearning all the ways I thought I wasn't enough. I didn't mention the relationships, the heartbreaks, the woman I thought I might marry once before she decided to move to Oregon and start over. That part still stung. He listened, quiet, like he was afraid speaking too much would break the fragile thread of permission I'd given him to be here. At one point, I asked him, "Did you ever think about reaching out sooner?" His face crumpled. Every year. Every damn year. But the longer I waited, the harder it got. I kept thinking maybe you didn't want to hear from me, that I didn't deserve to be forgiven. And then, well, life just kept moving, and I stayed stuck. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about the shop. He sold it last year. Said the tools didn't feel right in his hands anymore. Said the silence in the garage got too loud after he threw me out. He never remarried. Didn't date. He said he couldn't picture a future that made sense when he'd ruined the most important part of his past. Eventually, the conversation slowed. He looked toward the door, unsure whether to ask for more time or accept the miracle he'd already been granted. And then he pulled something from his coat pocket. A photograph. Worn. Creased. It was of me, 15, maybe, sitting on the front steps of our old house, wearing overalls and eating an ice cream cone. My hair was in one of his messy braids. I remembered the day. It was the last time I'd laughed with him, truly laughed, before everything changed. "I kept this in my wallet," he said, "all these years." I took the photo. My fingers brushed against his, and for the first time I didn't pull away. That night, after he left, I sat on the couch staring at that picture. The girl in it looked so full of light, so unaware of the storm brewing around her. I didn't know what to feel. There was no roadmap for this kind of reunion. No guidebook for healing something so deeply fractured. I wanted to believe people could change. That time softened hard hearts. But I also knew that some wounds didn't heal just because someone came back with apologies. They required more than words. They needed action, patience, proof. And then there was the question I hadn't dared to ask yet, the one that hovered beneath every word we'd exchanged. What was he really doing here? He said he wanted to make things right, but people don't just show up after 15 years without a reason. I knew there was something more, and I was going to find out, whether he was ready or not. The days that followed felt like standing in the middle of a quiet street, unsure whether to keep walking or turn around. My father had re-entered my life like a ghost with a heartbeat, unexpected, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. After so many years of silence, his presence stirred up more than just old memories. It stirred up the kind of questions that didn't have easy answers. He started calling, not every day, but enough for me to feel the rhythm of his voice settling back into my life. He'd ask how my week was going, tell me about the volunteer work he was doing now at the local food bank, sometimes send me articles about graphic design trends like he was trying to prove he was paying attention. At first, I kept the conversations short, polite but distant. But then, little by little, I started to ask him things about the past, about the things we never said. One night, we were on the phone and I asked him something that had been weighing on me since the moment he reappeared. "Why did you keep the photo?" He was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because it was the last moment I could look at without guilt. You were still happy. I hadn't broken anything yet." I didn't know what to say to that. There was something brutally honest about it. He wasn't pretending he had done the right thing. He wasn't justifying it. He was owning it in his own slow, painful way. Still, something in me remained guarded, as if I were waiting for the moment he'd reveal that this was all too good to be true. That moment came on a Sunday afternoon. He asked if we could meet in person again, this time not at my place, but somewhere neutral. I suggested a quiet coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and a small box resting on the chair beside him. The box caught my eye instantly. Wooden, about the size of a shoebox, with a brass latch and my initials carved into the top. "What's that?" I asked, sitting down. He slid the box toward me, his expression unreadable. "It's yours. It always was." I opened it slowly. Inside were pieces of my past, small things I'd thought were gone forever. My old sketchbook from high school, a charm bracelet my mom gave me when I turned 10, a dried flower from my senior prom, a stack of letters. "What is this?" I whispered, fingertips trembling as I picked up one of the envelopes. "They're letters," he said. "Ones I wrote you. Every year on your birthday. Every Christmas, every milestone. I never mailed them. I didn't even know where to send them half the time. But I wrote them anyway. I held one up, dated 4 years ago. Dear Claire, it began in shaky handwriting. I saw someone today who reminded me of you. Her laugh, the way she walked. I almost called out your name. I didn't read the rest. I couldn't. The words blurred through the welling tears in my eyes. You kept these all this time? I asked. He nodded. I thought, maybe one day I'd get the chance to give them to you. And even if I didn't, at least I'd said the things I never got to say. I sat back in the chair, overwhelmed. This wasn't the father who had thrown me out like trash. This was a man who had lived with the weight of that mistake every single day. A man trying, however clumsily, to build something out of the wreckage. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming, some deeper truth. And I was right. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. There's something else, he said, his voice low. Something I need to tell you. I braced myself, heart thudding. I wasn't the one who found the note from Lila. I blinked. What? He swallowed hard. It was your Aunt Carol. She came over while I was at work and went through your backpack. She found the note and called me. Said I had to fix it before the neighbors started talking. My stomach twisted. Aunt Carol had always been sharp-tongued and judgmental, the kind of woman who smiled while insulting you to your face. But I never imagined she'd be the reason my life had fallen apart. She threatened to tell the church, said I'd lose respect, clients, that your mother would be ashamed of me if I didn't act. I panicked, Claire. I let her fear become mine. I stared at him, stunned. 15 years of thinking he was the villain, when the story was far more tangled. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. Because I was a coward, he said. And because I thought if I blamed someone else, I'd never face what I actually did. I still made the choice to open that door and tell you to leave. No one forced me to do that. The anger rose unexpectedly, not just at him, but at her. At the woman who claimed to love our family but saw me as a stain to be scrubbed out. All this time, I said bitterly, you let me believe it was just you. It was me, he insisted. Carol lit the match. I set the fire. I stood, needing air. The box was still open on the table, memories spilling out like open wounds. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I need time, I said, to process all of this. To figure out if I can even begin to forgive you, or her, or any of it. I understand, he whispered, and I think he did. That night, I didn't sleep. I read some of the letters. Not all, but enough to see glimpses of a man I didn't recognize. One filled with guilt, sorrow, and a yearning to rewind time. One who wrote about me like I was the best part of his life, even after he'd let me go. But letters weren't enough. Not after everything. I knew I had to confront the person who started it all, Carol. And for the first time in 15 years, I wanted justice. Not just for myself, but for every piece of my life that had been taken from me. I was done being quiet. It was time to get answers, and I wouldn't let her hide behind fear anymore. She owed me the truth, and I was going to make sure she said it out loud, face to face. 2 days passed before I made the decision to visit Aunt Carol. I hadn't seen her since I was 19, when I passed her in a grocery store aisle and she turned her cart around before I could say a word. She didn't wave, didn't nod, just vanished down the frozen food section like I was a ghost she'd accidentally looked in the eye. That moment had burned into me, but now I understood it differently. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of the truth that followed me. And I was done letting that fear silence me. Her house was exactly as I remembered it. A single-story home with green shutters and a front porch cluttered with flower pots and wind chimes. The same wooden eagle still hung above the door, paint chipped and fading. I knocked with a kind of certainty I hadn't felt in years. When the door opened, she looked older, but not weaker. Her hair was gray now, pulled back tight, and her eyes, those sharp, scrutinizing eyes, narrowed when she saw me standing there. Claire, she said flatly. No warmth, no surprise, just recognition. I need to talk to you, I said, about what happened 15 years ago. She didn't invite me in. She didn't shut the door either. She stood still for a few seconds, then stepped aside, letting me pass into the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and rose potpourri. The living room hadn't changed. Same crocheted pillows, same heavy beige drapes filtering the light into dull gold. I sat on the edge of the couch. She stayed standing, arms crossed. "I know you found the note," I said, "and that you told my dad." Her jaw clenched. She didn't deny it. That told me everything. "Why?" I asked. "What were you hoping to accomplish?" She exhaled sharply, as if the question exhausted her. "It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection." "Protection?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean reputation." "Call it what you want," she said coolly. "Your father was grieving. He was already lost after your mother died. I didn't think he could handle more shame." I stood now, anger rising in my chest like fire licking the edges of my throat. "You ruined my life to save his pride." "I did what I thought was right," she snapped. "No, you did what was easy," I said. "You took a scared girl and turned her into a scandal. And then you walked away like none of it was your fault." For a moment, I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just looked at me with something close to regret, but not quite apology. "You were always strong," she said softly. "Stronger than I expected. You didn't disappear. You didn't come crawling back." "I almost did," I said. "You just never saw how close I was." I turned to leave, but just before I reached the door, she said, "He's been broken ever since. He never forgave himself." "Good," I said without looking back. Neither did I. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face like a slap. I felt lighter. Not because she had answered everything, but because I had finally spoken the words I'd swallowed for years. My silence had been a prison, and now I'd taken a sledgehammer to its walls. The next few weeks passed in strange waves. My father kept reaching out, leaving short voicemails if I didn't pick up, always saying he understood if I wasn't ready. But I was ready. For something. For closure, maybe. Or for the slow, unsteady path toward something new. One night, he invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. No hidden boxes, no confessions, just food and conversation. I accepted. He cooked like he used to. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, over-steamed green beans. The kitchen smelled like childhood. For a moment, I let myself sit in that nostalgia, soaking in the sound of the clinking forks, the scratch of the vinyl tablecloth under my hand. We talked. This time, not about the past. About music, books, the places I'd traveled. He asked questions like he was trying to memorize every version of me he'd missed. I told him about my art, my favorite hiking trail up Flagstaff Mountain, the poetry reading I'd done last year, even though my hands shook the entire time. He smiled at that. "You always had your mother's voice," he said. Gentle, but strong. That night, when I got home, I sat on my bed and cried. Not from pain, but from release. It was as if something inside me had been waiting for years for him to look at me and see a daughter again. But healing wasn't linear. And just when I thought the worst was behind me, life threw another curve. A letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in a shaky scrawl. I opened it and read the first line. "I've made mistakes that I can't take back, but there's one thing I need you to know." It was from my father. Not an apology this time. A confession. "I didn't just throw you out because of the note. I threw you out because I was scared you would turn out like your mother." I froze. He went on to explain that my mother had once confided in him, years before she died, that she had loved a woman once. Before him. Before everything. That part of her heart never fully closed. And though she had chosen him, built a life with him, he had never stopped fearing that she regretted it. "And when I saw that note from Lila," he wrote, "I saw your mother's eyes in yours. Not the part I married, the part I could never touch. And it scared me." The letter ended there. No signature. Just white space that said more than words ever could. I sat still for a long time, holding the paper like it was a bomb that had just gone off. My mother. That word alone carried weight. She had always been a figure of light in my memories. Strong, sweet, the kind of woman who made every room warmer just by standing in it. I never knew she had carried a secret of her own. That part of me was part of her, and suddenly, I felt more connected to her than I ever had before. She hadn't betrayed her family. She had buried herself to keep it together, and I was the living result of both her silence and her courage. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it between the pages of my journal. Then I picked up the phone and called my father. When he answered, I didn't ask why he hadn't told me sooner. I didn't yell or demand anything. Instead, I said, "She would have loved me." He didn't speak for a moment. And then, softly, "She did." And that was when I realized that vengeance doesn't always come in the form of destruction. Sometimes it comes through truth, through reclaiming what was stolen, and through rising, even when the people who broke you don't deserve your strength. I wasn't done yet, but I was stronger than I had ever been, and the next chapter was mine to write. The next chapter began quietly, but beneath the calm was a storm building momentum. It wasn't rage anymore. It wasn't even grief. It was purpose. For the first time in 15 years, I knew what I needed, not just to heal, but to reclaim the power that had been taken from me, decision by decision, silence by silence. I wasn't the same girl who walked out of that house at 18 with a duffel bag and a heart full of shame. I was a woman now, and I was ready to take control of my story. That started with my mother. I needed more than just that letter. I needed to understand her, not as the smiling woman in photographs, not as the mother who read to me at night and left little notes in my lunchbox, but as a woman with secrets and fears, and a quiet kind of strength that no one ever spoke about. I needed to know what she gave up, and why. I went looking for her, not in the literal sense. She was buried in the community cemetery near the edge of town, under a modest stone with a carved lily and the words, "Beloved wife and mother." I had stood by that grave more times than I could count, usually in silence, never knowing what to say. But this time, I brought questions. I sat by her headstone as the wind moved through the tall grass, and I spoke aloud. "Did you ever wish you'd told me? About her? About you? Were you afraid of what Dad would do? Did you think I'd be safer not knowing? Because it didn't make me safer. It made me think I was alone. It made me think something in me was broken." The wind didn't answer, but something in me settled. I imagined her listening, maybe not with ears, but with the same love I had always felt wrapped around me as a child. I could almost see her, kneeling beside me, hands warm on my back, eyes soft with recognition. After that visit, I found myself returning to places from my childhood. The park where we used to feed ducks, the old bookstore downtown where she bought me my first journal. I needed to see her life not as a mother, but as a woman who had walked through her own quiet rebellion and kept walking anyway. One afternoon, I visited the local library and asked about newspaper archives from the early 90s. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe some mention of my mother, something that hinted at her past. What I found instead was an old community bulletin from 1992. There was a black and white photo of a women's group that had held a charity event. My mother was in the front row. Next to her was a woman with her hand gently resting on my mother's shoulder. Her name was handwritten beneath the image, Evelyn Sharp. The name sparked something. I remembered it. Evelyn used to stop by the house sometimes when I was very young. I remembered her laugh, her bright scarves, how she always brought little chocolates and called me Sweet Pea. I hadn't thought about her in years. I found her name in the phone book. She still lived in Boulder. The next day, I called. She answered with a warm voice that hadn't aged a bit. "Evelyn Sharp," she said. "Hi. You probably don't remember me," I began. "My name is Claire Whitman. I'm Nancy Whitman's daughter." There was a pause, then a soft intake of breath. "Claire," she said, "of course I remember you. I asked if we could meet." She didn't hesitate. We met at a small cafe on Pearl Street. She was older now, with silver hair and kind eyes that studied me with emotion she didn't try to hide. "You look so much like her," she said as we sat. "I didn't know until recently," I said. "About you. About her. My father never told me." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I'm not surprised." "Were you in love with her?" She smiled, but it was tinged with sorrow. "Yes, and she loved me. For a long time, before she met your father. But when she did, she made a choice. She told me she wanted a family, a life that felt safe. She never stopped loving me. We stayed in touch for years, quietly, until one day she stopped calling. That was when I knew she had decided to disappear into the life she had built. I swallowed the lump in my throat. She told my father once, I said, and it scared him. Evelyn nodded again. She never wanted to hurt anyone. She just wanted to be allowed to love. But back then, it wasn't something people forgave easily, especially not in a town like this. We talked for over an hour. She told me stories about my mother I had never heard. How she used to dance in the kitchen with no music playing. How she once took a solo trip to New Mexico just to paint desert landscapes. How she kept a journal filled with dreams she never shared with anyone. I asked if she still had the letters. She shook her head. I burned them. After she stopped writing, it hurt too much to keep them. When we said goodbye, she held my hand and looked me in the eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you," she said. "Not just for surviving, but for seeking the truth." I left with a heart full of ache and clarity. My mother hadn't been a tragic figure. She was a woman who made impossible choices in a world that never made room for her truth. And I had inherited both her silence and her strength. When I got home, I found a message from my father. He wanted to meet again. I said yes. We met at a quiet park by the river, where the trees were just beginning to turn gold. He looked tired, but clearer. He brought a small leather-bound journal. "This was your mother's," he said. "I found it in the attic a few weeks ago. I didn't read it. I thought, maybe it was meant for you." I opened it when I got home. Inside were short entries, fragments of thought. Some pages were just single lines. "I love Evelyn, but I love Robert too. Is that betrayal? Claire laughed today, just like me when I was her age. What if she carries my truth? I hope one day she understands that love isn't shameful." The last page was blank. I closed the journal and held it to my chest. My mother had left me a legacy, not of pain, but of truth, of resilience, of quiet, defiant hope, and I would carry it forward. I knew now what I had to do. I would tell her story, and mine, not in whispers, but in a voice that refused to be silenced again. The decision to share my mother's story didn't come from a place of vengeance, not at first. It came from love, from longing, from the ache of knowing her story had lived in the shadows for too long. But the deeper I dove into the process, the more I realized that truth alone wasn't enough. People like Aunt Carol, like others in town who still whispered my name with judgment, they needed to see the truth lit up, undeniable. They needed to be forced to face what they had helped bury. And if that meant vengeance came wrapped in honesty, then so be it. I began collecting everything. The journal my father gave me, the photo from the newspaper archive, Evelyn's recollections, my own memories. I recorded voice notes every night, letting my thoughts spill out without editing. Some were painful. Others felt like breath after a long time underwater. I started writing them down. Essays at first, then a full manuscript. A memoir, not just mine, but my mother's. A dual journey of silenced love and rediscovered identity. I didn't hide behind vague language. I didn't soften the betrayal. I named names. I described the day my father opened that door and told me to leave. I wrote about the shame I carried, the people who abandoned me, and the silence that followed me like a second skin. I wrote about Evelyn, about the woman my mother loved before her life was rerouted by fear and pressure and cultural chains. I poured everything into those pages, and then I published it. The response was more than I expected. Local newspapers picked it up. A few online blogs shared my story. Then it reached a wider audience. People from across the country who wrote to me, thanking me, sharing their own stories. Children who had been cast out. Parents who regretted doing the casting. Strangers who had grown up in silence and suddenly saw themselves reflected in my words. The ripple effect was immediate, intimate, and powerful. But not everyone was pleased. Aunt Carol called me the week after the book's release. Her voice was like ice. "You had no right to air family matters like that," she hissed. "I had every right," I replied calmly. "It was my life too, my pain, and Mom deserved better. She chose her life. She chose your father. She chose safety, I said, because she knew people like you would never let her be free. She had a family, she snapped. You should be grateful. Grateful? I said, disbelief curling in my gut. She had to hide who she was until the day she died. I had to live in shame because no one had the courage to tell the truth. And I lost both of my parents before I turned 19. One to death, the other to fear. Don't you dare talk to me about gratitude. She hung up on me. That moment didn't bring closure, but it brought peace. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her to understand. I just needed her to know that her version of the story was no longer the only one being told. My father, on the other hand, surprised me. He bought 10 copies of the book. He gave them to people he used to work with, to his new church group, to the men he had coffee with every Thursday morning at the diner near 9th Street. And when one of them questioned him, asked if it was wise to stir up the past, my father stood up and said something I never thought I'd hear. If telling the truth makes you uncomfortable, he said, that means it's finally doing its job. He started volunteering at an LGBTQ+ shelter in Denver, helping young adults who had been kicked out of their homes. The same way I once was. He never tried to make it about redemption. He just showed up, quietly, steadily, like a man who understood that some things can't be fixed, but they can be faced. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I flinched at his voice, where I had to remind myself that the man who had hurt me was the same man trying to change, but we kept trying, together. That was more than I'd ever thought possible. One afternoon, we sat on a bench outside a bookstore that had just featured my memoir in their window. The sun was soft against the buildings, and the air smelled like new pages and spring grass. I read the chapter about the photograph, he said. I nodded. You made me human, even when I didn't deserve it. I looked at him. He looked older in the light, but also lighter. You were human, I said. That was the problem. He chuckled softly. Fair enough. Then more seriously, he asked, do you think she'd be proud of us? After everything? I thought of my mother, of her journal, her smile, her secrets, of Evelyn, of how much courage it took just to survive in silence. She'd be proud of me, I said, and maybe someday of you. He didn't argue. He just nodded. A few weeks later, I received an invitation from the local community center. They were hosting a panel on identity, healing, and family reconciliation. They asked if I'd speak. I said yes. The room was packed. Faces of every kind. Some young, some old. Some smiling, some tearful. My father sat in the back row, quiet, watching. I told my story, from the day I was cast out to the day I let him back in. From the first moment I doubted my worth to the day I finally claimed it. I read passages from the memoir. I answered questions. I cried. I laughed. So did the audience. When it was over, a teenage girl came up to me. Her hands were shaking. I came out to my parents last week, she said. They told me to leave. I didn't know where to go. But then I read your book. She took a deep breath. And I didn't feel so alone. I hugged her, tightly. In that moment, I understood what healing really looked like. Not forgetting, not erasing, but choosing to turn the wound into something that lights the way for others. That night, my father and I walked home together, side by side. Thank you for not closing the door, he said quietly. You're lucky I opened it in the first place, I replied. He laughed. And for the first time in 15 years, I laughed with him, because I had rewritten the ending, because I had taken the secret that once shattered us and turned it into something unbreakable. And because vengeance in the end wasn't fire or fury, it was truth. It was survival. It was finally being seen, and never letting anyone make me invisible again. Years passed, and life moved forward, not in a blur, but with clarity. After the memoir, after the panels and the interviews, after the quiet apologies and unexpected letters from strangers who found a piece of themselves in my journey, the world didn't magically heal. But something shifted, not just in me, but in the spaces I walked through. People started looking me in the eye differently, not with pity, not with judgment, but with recognition, as if they knew what it meant to carry a story too heavy to hold alone and still manage to tell it. I still lived in Boulder. I could have moved. Part of me thought about it after the book tour ended. New York, maybe. Portland. Somewhere new. Somewhere anonymous. But in the end, I stayed. Because staying meant reclaiming. It meant walking the same streets that once felt like cages and now felt like wide, open maps of who I'd become. Boulder wasn't the place that broke me anymore. It was the place I chose to bloom. My father and I found a rhythm. We didn't try to relive the years we lost. That would have been impossible. But we made space for what we had left. Sunday breakfasts, afternoon walks. Sometimes we went weeks without talking. And that was okay. There was no pressure, no pretending. Just the understanding that we were both still learning how to love each other in this new form. And maybe that was the most honest version of love there is. He never stopped volunteering. The shelter in Denver became a second home for him. He called the kids there his second chance family. They called him Pop Rob. I visited a few times, brought books, brought cookies, talked to kids whose stories mirrored mine, but who still hadn't found their endings. Some of them cried. Some of them laughed like nothing could break them. All of them reminded me why telling the truth mattered. Evelyn passed away 2 years after the book came out. She had a stroke in her sleep. Peaceful. That's what they said. I remember sitting at her memorial, looking around at all the women she had mentored, supported, fought for. So many voices, so many lives touched by hers. I stood up to speak when they opened the floor. I didn't get enough time with her, I said. But in the short time I did, she gave me a piece of my mother I never knew I was missing. And in doing that, she gave me a piece of myself. I keep one of Evelyn's scarves in my studio now, bright orange and soft to the touch. Sometimes I wear it when I work on a new piece, especially when I'm stuck. It reminds me of warmth, of rebellion wrapped in kindness, of women who carved out their own spaces in a world that told them they couldn't exist. I eventually wrote another book. Not a sequel, exactly. More like a collection of letters. Some to my mother, some to my younger self, some to girls and boys and everyone in between who thought they were too different to be loved. That book was quieter, but it found its audience. Teachers began using it in classrooms. Therapists gave it to patients. A group in San Francisco turned one of the chapters into a stage monologue. I watched it once, sitting in the third row, anonymous. Hearing my words spoken by someone else broke something open in me all over again. But this time, it didn't hurt. It felt like breathing. Aunt Carol never changed. At least, not that I know of. She moved away a year after the memoir was published. Someone told me she was living in a retirement community in Arizona now. I don't think about her much anymore. She doesn't occupy space in my life the way she used to. I no longer carry her silence like a wound. I carry my voice instead. Sometimes I get letters from kids who ask me what to do when their families reject them. I never give one-size-fits-all answers. Every story is different. Every heart breaks its own way, but I always write back. I always tell them that love doesn't have to come from blood. That family can be built from the ground up, brick by beautiful brick. That their worth is not defined by the people who failed to see it, and that their truth, no matter how quiet, is sacred. I opened an art studio last year, small, cozy, filled with light. I named it The Second Door, a tribute to the one that was slammed in my face and the one I opened years later, not just for my father, but for myself. Inside, we host workshops, classes, story circles. Teenagers come in after school. Adults come in on weekends. Some come just to sit and read. Others come to paint and scream into color. It's messy, beautiful, alive, just like healing. My father painted a mural on the back wall, a wide-open door with a rainbow of footsteps leading out of it, and a single line written underneath. You don't have to be who they expected you to be. He said it was something my mother once wrote in the margin of a recipe book. That mural has become something of a local landmark. People take pictures with it. Some cry when they see it. Others smile like they've just been given permission to exist. And maybe they have. On the 15th anniversary of the night my father kicked me out, he and I sat on my porch, watching the sunset burn through the clouds. He had a small photo album with him. Inside were pictures from the past decade. Me at a book signing, Him at the shelter, kids drawing rainbows, a letter from a girl in Kentucky who said my book saved her life, and one photo I hadn't seen before, my mother and Evelyn, sitting on a picnic blanket, laughing like nothing else in the world existed. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "Evelyn sent it to me before she passed," he said. "She said I should have it. Said it belonged with you." I stared at it for a long time. "I didn't know she ever smiled like that," I said. "She did," he said. "You have her smile, Claire." We didn't say much after that. Just sat, listening to the wind, to the world moving around us, to the silence that, for once, felt full. When he left that night, he hugged me before I could stop him. It wasn't awkward or unsure. It was steady, certain. And when he pulled back, he looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm proud of you. I hope I live long enough to see everything you still have left to become." "You already have," I said. "You just didn't know it." He smiled, and then he was gone. That was the last time we sat on that porch together. He passed away quietly 6 months later. A heart attack, sudden. I got the call at dawn. I cried. Real tears. Not just for the man he became, but for the years we lost. And then I got up, dressed, and went to the studio. I opened the doors, turned on the lights, and sat in front of the mural, staring at that line he painted for the world. "You don't have to be who they expected you to be." I whispered it aloud. Then I picked up a brush, and I started something new, because that's what survivors do. We create, we remember, we rise, and we never, ever close the door again. Have you ever been rejected by the people who were supposed to love you the most? Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, alone, just to find your truth? Share your story in the comments below. If Claire's journey touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories of healing, identity, and redemption. And if you know someone who's struggling to be seen for who they truly are, send this video their way. Because sometimes, the strength to speak your truth becomes the greatest act of vengeance and the most beautiful path to freedom.